Welcome to drag racing in 1957, where the majority of races were single-day events. There were a couple of 2 days, but all the events that were 3 or more days were nationals. And national events were put on by the NHRA, the AHRA, the ATAA, the ITA, and NASCAR, except the NASCAR Daytona Beach event was canceled that year because of rioting. It also didn't help our cause that the National Safety Council had issued their recommendation that all authorities and organizations refrain from supporting drag racing. Coming into 57, the best speed of all time was 159.01 miles an hour. That's all going to change on February 3rd, 1957, Long Beach, California at Lions Drag Strip. It's the final round of Top Eliminator. Emery Cook is piloting the Cook and Bedwell dragster. He takes the win light and he runs 165.13 miles an hour. That speed was such a huge leap forward, the track officials stopped, inspected all the timing equipment, and had the ET clocks looked at. They were skeptical. They asked Cook if he minded coming back up and making another run. And boy, did he make another run. 166.97 miles an hour not only was a new record, it was really the shot heard round the world for drag racing. The effects of this were immediate and severe. This put us into the fuel ban. And NHRA takes a lot of the blame / credit for instituting the fuel ban, and the reality is they had absolutely nothing to do with it. The first one to institute a pump gas only race was CJ Hart, who managed the local Santa Ana drag strip not far from Lions. Now CJ cited the rising costs of racing and the ability to safely stop the cars. Now remember, this is in the days before parachutes, there's drum brakes on the dragsters, and Santa Ana didn't have an extremely long runoff area there. In fact, Santa Ana would run pump gas only for the remainder of that track's existence. It was about a week and a half later that 6 more Los Angeles area tracks came on board the fuel ban. Now, several of those are actually going to go back and start running nitro in the not too distant future. I don't know if the crowds went down or the participation waned somewhat. By March 1st, there was a dozen tracks on board, and this thing just started growing. It started spreading across the country, and many more tracks went to gas only. Keep in mind though, many of them didn't. A lot of tracks still maintained them running fuel. Fuel would be nitro or alcohol, anything other than pump gas. NHRA did not make an official statement until March 20th, a month and a half after this run had taken place. And their statement was pretty simple. At our nationals in Oklahoma City, it is now moved there for 1957, we're only going to allow pump gas. Now, at this meeting amongst the multiple Southern California tracks when they decided to ban fuel, they also decided to ban multi-engined cars. In fact, there was heavy debate over whether or not to eliminate superchargers or blowers altogether there. NHRA was going to allow multi-engine cars to run at their nationals. At this point in time, if you read the race results, you wouldn't necessarily know if the car was powered by nitro, alcohol, or gasoline. But once this fuel ban went into effect, they would clearly delineate accomplishments at this point. And my guess is because the average gas car was about 15 mile an hour slower than its nitro counterpart, to give credit where due to the winners in the gas classes, they would always specify that was a gasoline-powered car. Meanwhile, the NHRA has now had to postpone the safety safari for 1957. Remember, you've got the National Safety Council, the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. Both of them are kind of giving a thumbs down to the sport. Mobile Socony has pulled their sponsorship out, and NHRA is eventually going to have to cancel the safety safari for 57 altogether. They're still planning on running it in 1958. Now, it's not all bad news in racing. We do have a nice article in the New Yorker, and in fact, drag racing makes the April 29th cover of Life magazine, so there was some positive ink for the sport. If you were a racer that wanted to try your hand at running longer races and really see what the top speed of your car was, Riverside, California and Reno, Nevada both had half-mile drag races. In fact, Reno actually ran some 4-wide races. The World Series of Drag Racing, now in its 4th year, is going to move over to Cordova, Illinois, where it has stayed from 1957 until 2020, with the exception of 1 year in Memphis. They also are running Fosdick dual-lane timers. Now, up to this point in time, nearly every track, and it's still going to be a couple years before they phase into it, only has single lane timers. And that's why in qualifying, they're all single runs. They're only able to pick up the start beam and finish line beam on the first vehicle that does that. By having dual lane timers and the ability to get ET and mile an hour in either lane, you could literally cut the qualifying in half for a race. And maybe more important, they've now got an electronic finish line. Instead of somebody standing up at a hut at the finish line and trying to determine which car crosses first, the electronic eye is going to do it and made it a lot more accurate. NHRA does an editorial in their Tie Rod newspaper basically explaining why they moved from Great Bend to Kansas City to Oklahoma, and they put the blame squarely on the prior racetracks. NHRA had sunk a lot of money into them in a losing effort, and sponsors that had promised money that never came through on that. Drag News is now much, much closer to a national paper. It's no longer just focusing on Southern California, no longer just California. It's actually spreading out and showing a whole lot more coverage at a whole lot more racetracks. And one of the things that's made my research take so long to do each episode here is I got to read all the tie rods, all the hot rod magazines, and the Drag News I could go through and just just read the headlines on there, and that's fine. But if you start reading individual race reports, you really uncover a lot of treasures. In fact, by this period in 1957, you're starting to see a lot of names that would become household in the next few years. Now, at this point in time, a lot of them are racing 80-mile-an-hour coupes or sedans, but they're going to eventually be superstars in the sport. You're going to see names like Larry Dixon, Bruce Larson, Hayden Proffitt, Tommy Ivo, and Tom McEwen. At the end of most drag races, there's still a top eliminator runoff. They're going to take the winners from the fastest categories and run them for kind of a king of the hill deal, because a lot of tracks have switched to pump gas, and it's lowered the speed and it's increased the ETs of those cars. The motorcycles are taking a lot of top eliminator trophies at this period of time. The NHRA Nationals in Oklahoma City. The winner is Buddy Sampson. The top speed is down 7 miles per hour from the prior year where they were allowed to run nitro, but amongst his loot and prizes for winning that event, he is presented with a brand new Norge washing machine. So lucky Buddy on that one. Now, the ATAA and ITA races both run nitro. Those were both won by Seto Pastoian from Detroit. The AHRA Nationals, also on nitro, was won by Emery Cook and that dominating Cook and Bedwell car. The common denominator of all three of those races was the runner-up. It was the Speed Sport Roadster out of Tucson, Arizona. And little bit of irony there, they did get a little bit of payback on Emery Cook. Emery's eventually taken his speed record up to 168 miles an hour. That Speed Sport Roadster bumped it to 169 miles an hour in October 57 to become the fastest car in drag racing for 1 month. In November, I believe it was November 10th in Brookville, Florida, Don Garlits goes 176 miles an hour to become the fastest man in drag racing. So at the end of 1957, the three fastest cars in the sport, 2 are dragsters, 1's a rear engine roadster. All of them are high gear only, all of them are Chrysler Hemis, all of them are carbureted, and none of them run a supercharger. Yet, most of the cars that had switched over to gas, I had mentioned they had slowed down significantly. In an effort to try to get back some of that lost power, a lot of them had resorted to bolting superchargers on their cars. And over the next couple of years, the nitro drivers recognized that even with nitro in the fuel tank, putting that supercharger on can make their cars radically faster. So in 1957, we've got multi-disc clutches. We've got state-of-the-art rear tires that are 8 inches wide on the fastest cars out there. We have got performance gains that are taking place weekly, and now we are stuck right in the middle of the fuel ban. Stay tuned.